cocaine or heroin than with methamphetamine, but that's just what I see. But I can't speak to what is regionally being observed.
Have you heard of the phrase goofball or speedball?
I've heard of speedball, yes.
Okay, but not so. Speedball usually being in like a fentanyl, an opiate, and cocaine, right?
Yeah, it used to be heroin and cocaine.
Heroin and cocaine. I'm sorry. And but you've never heard the term goofball.
No.
Okay. Now, in again this particular case, your lab also tested the pills that were found in the squad car as well as in the Mercedes-Benz, right?
Our crime lab did that, yes.
And you've reviewed those?
I have not.
Okay. But similar to fentanyl and norphamphetamines, which is the metabolite, right?
In a tablet, or are you saying?
No, in Mr. Floyd's blood sample.
Yes, there was methamphetamine.
Right. And just generally speaking, methamphetamine is the active drug, and amphetamine is the metabolite of that drug.
It's a metabolite, but it's also active.
Okay. So, meaning it's, what do you mean it's also active?
I mean, it's an active metabolite. It also exerts effects.
So a person would have an effect from both of those substances?
Correct.
Meaning an intoxicating effect?
Not necessarily.
But some effect?
Some effect.
Went to the DUI population, Mr. Floyd's amphetamine and methamphetamine ratio was on the low side, right?
So we didn't look at the ratio of methamphetamine to amphetamine with Mr. Floyd because it was below the reporting limit. It's not on the report. We didn't report it.
Okay. So you can't compare the ratio, but his methamphetamine level was on the low side.
Compared to the DUI population, yes.
And in comparison to the DUI population, as well as the postmortem cases, again, there may have been other drugs, as you say, on board,
Yes.
right? Okay. I have no further questions for now.
Redirect.
NMS, and the testing that was performed in conjunction with accreditation standards. Do you remember those questions?
Yes.
You were asked by the medical examiner's office to perform the testing in this case, is that right?
Correct.
And NMS performed the testing that was requested, is that
Yes.
right? And did NMS follow all the standard operating procedures when it came to that testing?
We did.
You didn't report anything in your final report that was below your reporting limit, correct?
No.
But you maintain that data in connection with your standard procedures, is that right?
Yes. The result, the data shows what we found.
And why do you do that?
Excuse me?
Why do you keep that data?
Because we keep that in a normal course of business.
And is it important to have a record of the testing you did and the things that you went through to achieve your result? You were also asked some questions about the methamphetamine level that Mr. Floyd had in his system. You indicated that it was a low level, that 19 nanograms per milliliter, correct?
Yes.
And it was so low, in fact, that you wouldn't expect to feel an intoxicating effect from that level, would you?
I would not.
And in fact, so low that as part of your lab procedures, you'd want to rule out that it's not just a contaminant. That's how low it was, right?
I wouldn't say that. I mean, it's real. It's there, and it was confirmed.
And it was confirmed, part of that confirmation process was that the amphetamine at least supported that it was not just a contaminant. Is that right?
That's true.
But either way, Mr. Floyd's methamphetamine levels were lower than 94% of the driving under the influence population when it comes to methamphetamine. Is that
Yes.
right? You were also asked some questions about the fentanyl levels in this. Obviously, depending, as you described earlier, depending on an individual's tolerance, a level of 11 nanograms per milliliter could have a different effect on a different person, on different people, depending on their level of tolerance. Is that right?
Yes.
And in your experience with respect to recent or acute fentanyl use, there are a number of cases where you would expect to see no norfentanyl. Is that right?
So yes, we do observe that in cases where we know something's acute, let's say with somebody that dies with a syringe in their arm or something like that.
And if somebody dies with a syringe in their arm, you would expect there to be little to no norfentanyl. Is that right?
Correct.
And why is that?
Because it's a very acute amount. It doesn't mean you could never find it because there could be previous fentanyl use, but that's just not our general observation in that kind of situation.
And in that way, the ratio becomes important. Is that right?
Correct.
And why is the ratio important? And so Mr. Floyd's ratio of 1.96, 11 nanograms per milliliter of fentanyl to 5.6 nanograms per milliliter of norfentanyl, supports that there was survival time after the ingestion of fentanyl. Is that right?
Sustained.
What does that ratio show you?
It shows two things, that there was survival time from an earlier dose, or there could be an additional dose on top of previous doses.
And again, the ratio is consistent and lower than the average ratio that you see for driving under the influence cases with fentanyl on board. Is that right?
Sustained.